the evolution of the war on terror. Where did the war on terror come from? Who owns it? Who designed it? Whose strategy is it? Well, it all started with this man here, Menachem Begin. He's the Russian-born terrorist who came to Palestine in 1942. He became leader of the Irgun, which was a very radical terrorist group. And he ordered the bombing of the King David Hotel in 1946, which killed 93 people. That's pretty clearly terrorism. He created the Likud party in 1973 and became prime minister in 1977. And then he promptly invaded Lebanon in 78 and again in 1982, killing at least 20,000 people. But here's what they thought in 1948. And it says in Hebrew, by the gun, it's written in Hebrew, the only solution. In Hebrew, it's rak kach, only thus. Only by the gun will they be able to achieve this expansive territory that they aspire to. And this is all based, the Irgun is based on the hardline ideology of a man named Jabotinsky. And Jabotinsky was the head of something called the New Zionist Organization in New York. He died in 1940, and when Jabotinsky died in 1940, it was taken over by Netanyahu's father. And this is the idea of the Greater Israel. This is from an article in a Hebrew Israeli website. It says what Israel's future borders will look like. Basically from the River Nile to the River Euphrates and everything in between. And it's interesting, when the United Nations first created the State of Israel by the partition plan in 1947, they partitioned Palestine between Israeli and Jewish groups, or Jewish and Palestinian groups. And the next day, Menachem Begin denounced it, saying, the partition of Palestine is illegal. It will never be recognized. Jerusalem was and will forever be our capital. And Eretz Israel will be restored to the people of Israel, all of it and forever. This is the ideology of the current state of Israel, of the Likud coalition. And the Likud party has ruled Israel since 1977. In 1948, this is the first Rothschild agent who became a head of the state of Israel. His name is David Ben Gurion. And 1 week after Israel was established with this conclusion, or the beginning of the war in 1948, he said to his military brass, he said, we, the Israelis, should prepare to go over on the offensive with the aim of smashing Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. He said the weak point was Lebanon. He said we can establish a Christian state in the south of that country. And he said we will smash the Arab Legion's strength and bomb Amman, that's Jordan, and eliminate Jordan. And then Syria will fall. If Egypt dares to fight, we will bomb Cairo and Alexandria. This is very aggressive talk coming from a little man in a little country that's just been created. But this is the name of the game. Here is Menachem Begin, and this is the King David Hotel that he oversaw the destruction of in 1946 and killed 93 people. This is very similar to 9/11, actually. And in what they were doing in this case is that this was British military headquarters, the King David Hotel, and the British had collected evidence in a raid, a cross-country raid, and they had gotten evidence that proved that all of the heads of the Zionist movement were involved in terrorism, even the heads of the Jewish agency, which meant that if justice was to be served, these men would be hanged. So in order to prevent the entire Zionist enterprise from going to the gallows, they destroyed the evidence and killed a lot of people. This is Shimon Peres, who has always had the opinion that Israel should frighten the West. This is the former Prime Minister of Israel, Moshe Sharett, 1955. He's speaking about Shimon Peres because they had just discovered and made public another false flag attack on America and Britain called the Lavon Affair, where these Mossad, these Israeli intelligence people, planted bombs in American and British buildings in Cairo, in Egypt. And what Moshe Sharett said, he said, Shimon Peres shares the same ideology as Lavon. He wants to frighten the West into supporting Israel's aims. Here is Menachem Begin being interviewed by a British journalist, and he was asked in 1974, he was asked, how does it feel, Mr. Begin, in the light of all that's going on, to be the father of terrorism in the Middle East? And Begin laughed, and he said, in the Middle East, He said, in all the world, putting upon himself the mantle of being the father of terrorism in all the world. This is the man who founded the political party that is now controlling Israel. He admits to himself he's the father of terrorism. So when we call the Likud party the party of terrorists, it's not hyperbole. Here he was in 1977 when he became elected to the prime ministership in Israel. And these are the three, this is the troika of terrorists that led the party in the very beginning. It's Menachem Begin in the middle, Yitzhak Shamir to the right, and Ariel Sharon to the left. If you remember 1982, Ariel Sharon was the butcher of Beirut. Here's Mr. Shamir, Yitzhak Shamir, and Shamir was in charge of another terrorist gang called the Stern Gang, or Lehi. And as head of the Stern Gang, he oversaw the murder of the United Nations mediator in Palestine. This man here in the photograph. His name is Folke Bernadotte. He's a royal guy from the Swedish royal family, the Bernadotte family. And he was sent there to the United Nations to try to make some solution, some viable solution to the partition plan of 1947 and the war that broke out in 1948. And the problem was why Shamir killed him is because this man, the Swedish man, said that we can only solve this problem if we allow the Palestinian refugees to come back to their homes. Well, that makes sense, right? But that was anathema to the Zionists. They said, we cannot let any of these Palestinians come home. We're living in their homes now. So it had to be stopped. So they killed Folke Bernadotte in a Bonnie and Clyde style ambush in Jerusalem. And in that gang that killed Bernadotte was this man's father. This man is Ram Emanuel. His father is Benjamin Emanuel, a doctor in Chicago. This man is now the mayor of Chicago. But Ram Emanuel, as I said, his father was a member of the Stern Gang in Israel when they killed Bernadotte. And it was a small gang. And then in the 1950s, early 50s, he came to America, this Auerbach, his father. His original name was Auerbach. And he had these 3 kids. And Ram Emanuel became the head Mossad agent in the White House during the time of Bill Clinton, and then he was the first person appointed by Barack Obama. He was chief of staff for Barack Obama, and he was Bill Clinton's special advisor. He was the Mossad man in the White House. He's also the guy who pushed NAFTA through. NAFTA in 1993. If you remember the election of 1992, NAFTA was the big issue. And when he came into the White House, he single-handedly pushed it through Congress. Odd. Is that an Israeli agenda? Getting NAFTA, destroying our manufacturing base? Seems to be. Here is the south of Lebanon that Menachem Begin tried to grab for Israel in 1978. The Israelis only vacated from this area in 2002 due to the resistance of the Hezbollah group. Well, when the Israelis created this doctrine of the war on terror, they needed, obviously, an enemy. You have to have an enemy. So they had to create an enemy because the enemy wasn't there. So they had to create one. And when the Red Army, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979, that gave the Americans and the Israelis the opportunity to create this anti-Western force. We began arming, Ronald Reagan and the CIA began arming the Mujahideen, here seen in the Oval Office. And in this operation, which really began with a lot of money in 1983, the CIA was arming the Afghans to fight the Red Army. And the main allies in this operation were Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan. And the guy that ran it from the Congress was this man, Charlie Wilson from Texas. He was very, very pro-Israel, and when he got elected to Congress in 1973, he went to Washington, and he came under the wing of the Mossad station chief in Washington, a man named Zvi Rafia. And what happened, if you read the book about Charlie Wilson's war, you'll read that the lion's share of the money from the CIA in Saudi Arabia was given to this group led by this man, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, seen in the lower picture there, with the black beard. And what's peculiar about this is that the CIA and the Mossad were arming the most anti-Western group out there. There were other groups they could have given money to Abdul Haq, who was a very effective Pashtun fighter. Very effective. And yet they didn't give money to Abdul Haq, rather they gave money to this guy's operation, which never had any success in the battlefield, which was known for like basically stirring up the other groups, you know, the other Mujahideen groups, and which was the most anti-Western. Why would the Americans and the Israelis be funding and arming the most anti-Western group out there? It doesn't make any sense unless you consider that what they were really doing is they were creating the enemy for the war on terror, the next war. They were creating tomorrow's enemy. This is how it worked. The Mossad connection, Charlie Wilson was the guy that wanted to defeat the Red Army, wanted to arm these guys, and he was being led by this Israeli head of the Mossad, the man in the lower picture, Zvi Rafia, who was in fact the Mossad station chief in Washington. And what Rafia did is that he used Charlie Wilson's office, congressional office, as if it were his own. This is a quote from the book, Charlie Wilson's War. It says on the lower left, Zvi Rafia always acted as if he owned Wilson's office. One of the staffers kept a list of people he needed to lobby. He would use the phones, give projects to the staff, and call on Charlie to intervene whenever he needed him. So this is a case where the Mossad chief was basically using a congressman and his office to accomplish Israeli policy in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And what they did is that the Israelis trained these Afghan fighters. And the Hekmatyar group included a group of Arabs, which are called the Afghan Arabs. These are Arabs who were sent or went to Pakistan in order to fight with the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen, of course, were Afghan people, not Arabs. The Arabs were people come from Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries to fight with them in the jihad, right? And what's interesting is that the people who were training this group was Israeli military intelligence. And at the time, 1983, 84, and 85, the man who headed Israeli military intelligence was Ehud Barak, the man who blamed Osama bin Laden. So his men are the ones who trained Osama bin Laden in the beginning. Okay, now 1983, Ehud Barak, this is Ehud Barak as military intelligence chief. He's shaking hands with Ariel Sharon when Ariel Sharon was found guilty of personal responsibility in the massacre of Sabra and Shatila. He had to leave office, he had to give up his defense portfolio, and the Kahan Commission in Israel said that because he was personally responsible for the massacres in Sabra and Shatila, that he should never hold office in Israel again. How many years later? Less than 20 years later, he was elected prime minister of the country. Ariel Sharon became prime minister a few weeks after George Bush finally became president of this country in the winter of 2001. Here is the Mossad's man who trained Osama bin Laden. His name is Ali Mohammed. And he was the first trainer of Al-Qaeda. He's the one who trained Osama bin Laden and al-Zawahiri. He's the one who set up the bombing of the U.S. embassies in Africa. And he was involved in all the Al-Qaeda terrorist activities in the 1980s, like the USS Cole and the African bombings. And what happened is that the United States then held him in a trial, put him in a trial for the bombing of the embassies in Africa, and he was found guilty. And then he was put away in American state penitentiary, federal penitentiary for life or something like that. And then he just disappeared. He's completely disappeared. He disappeared from the American judicial system. He disappeared from the federal penitentiary system like thin air, gone. And what's interesting about this fella is that he was a Hebrew-speaking double agent. Supposedly Egyptian, yet he spoke fluent Hebrew. So he's obviously some sort of triple agent working for the Israelis as well. And you have to understand that when the Israeli military intelligence started training the Al-Qaeda people in Pakistan, the people who became Al-Qaeda, they had to have Arabic-speaking trainers. And that's not a problem for Israel because there's many, many Israelis who were born in places like Morocco or Iraq who speak the language and can appear to be Iraqi or Moroccan or Egyptian very well, but are in fact Israelis. And so Ali Mohammed and the Israelis trained these characters who became Al-Qaeda. And of course, Al-Qaeda then morphed into ISIS, what we're fighting today. Now, what's the latest phase in this war on terror? These guys, Islamic State. Who are these guys? That's the question. We know that something like 22,000 of these men are all paid mercenaries, which is why they wear the black ski masks, because they have red hair or black skin or white skin, or they don't look like Syrians or Iraqis, because they're not. Many of them, I would presume, are actually Israelis.